Thank you, Mr Chair. I take your call in the Kaipara District Council Validation of Rates and Other Matters Bill on behalf of New Zealand First, and New Zealand First cannot support this legislation. We believe that retrospective legislation is the absolute worst way to deal with this because it exonerates the guilty. And in so doing, I would like to give a corrected history of how this sorry saga came about. In about 2000, the Kaipara District Council awarded the role of head consultant for the Mangawhai Sewerage Project to Becca Carter. Reading from Becca's own website, it states, and I quote, "Becca is one of the largest employee-owned engineering and related consultancy services companies in the Asia-Pacific. As well as numerous engineering consultancy services, Becca's offer architecture, planning, project and cost management, land information, valuations and software services. Becca supplies engineering and related consultancy services to many markets, including industrial, buildings, government, water, transport and power," unquote. Becca's at the time, and this is back around 2000, evaluated tenders for the project and awarded the tender to themselves, providing $675,000 ratepayers' money to manage the bid process. Becca's then, in cohorts with the Kaipara District Council CEO Jack McKercher, then very quickly settled on an Australian outfit called Simon's Engineering as the preferred bidder. This outfit was represented by one Mr Peter Elliott, who was shepherded everywhere by the Becca project leader Brent Johnston. Elliott made a sales pitch to the full Kaipara District Council. He said that his firm Simons had done dozens of projects like the Mangawhai one in Australia. They were a dime a dozen for them, he said. In fact, the biggest scheme they'd ever done was a trailer park, equivalent to a single subdivision in Mangawhai. At the time, Councillor Bruce Rogan, who is now the chair of the Mangawhai Residents and Ratepayers Association, said that what this council would really appreciate is a referral to just one happy customer from among their stated hundreds throughout Australia and Pacific, and so that Elliott's claims could be verified independently. Councillor Rogan was savagely attacked by both Mr Johnston and the Mayor for being so rude and discourteous to a guest. The requested information by that councillor was not forthcoming. In 2002, some months after the new Local Government Act came into effect, government changed the law relating to infrastructure projects. The whole Mangawhai Eco-Care project had been conceived as a 25-year boot, a build, own, operate, transfer project. These were banned under the law change. Neither Becca nor the CEO, McKercher, wanted to revisit anything because the deal had already been secretly committed to. They refused a request from Councillor Rogan to reopen the tenders. He argued that because the project could no longer legally proceed as planned, and because the project builder was now no longer required to be able to finance the construction, many much smaller local organisations would possibly be able to bid for the job. This was refused because that was the last thing that they wanted. Just before Simons were publicly awarded the contract, and they had already had it for months in secret, Councillor Rogan sought and got a resolution of council to advise Simons that if they exceeded budget, the entire district would have to be consulted about its willingness to pay the overrun. But because it was not going to fall on the hapless community, saddled with the overpriced white elephant. If the district as a whole declined to wear that, then Simons needed to understand they would not get paid. The CEO, Jack McKercher, was instructed to write to Simons to that effect. However, the CEO, Jack McKercher, did not write as instructed by the Kaipara District Council. This was discovered at the next council meeting, where Councillor Rogan requested that that letter be tabled for perusal. McKercher stated that he had not done so because it might have frightened the horses. After the meeting, Councillor Rogan himself wrote to Simons informing them of the earlier council decision. This did have an effect because they bolted, and subsequently the Simons company went belly up. Still, there was no appetite to change anything, so moves were made to find a replacement for the contractor, Simons, and leave everything else intact. Earth Tech were ushered in, but in parallel, and possibly under separate covers, Becca acquired the skeletal remains of Simons and created an enterprise called Becca Simon, which promoted itself as a multinational infrastructure builder. So now we have the project manager building projects using the resources of the company that awarded the eco contract to. It is not easy to ascertain what happened to Becca Simon, but it may have morphed into Tyco or been absorbed by them. Tyco, through a subsidiary called Water Infrastructure Group, ended up running the entire wastewater system project and still does. During this whole period, Mr Chair,
The Honourable Member Andrew Williams.
During this period, other Kaipara District councillors became increasingly alarmed by the Mangawhai scheme. Requests for full financials were declined. Quarterly reviews, and we heard this at the Select Committee, quarterly reviews usually provided by all local authorities to elected members were not given to Kaipara councillors. Councillors who stood up to the CEO, Jack McKercher, and to the Mayor faced legal threats. But questions need to be asked about the relationship between Jack McKercher and Beckers over an extended period of time. How was it that Mr McKercher was in a live-in romantic relationship with one of his council staff employees involved with the planning for the Mangawhai sewage scheme? When the sexual liaison was uncovered, that particular council employee transferred out of the council, and guess where she turned up? At Beckers. She turned up at Beckers, who then contracted her back to provide services to the Kaipara District Council. What a convenient relationship this was between Beckers, this woman, and the CEO, Jack McKercher. Why was it also that another $7 million plus sewage scheme being planned on the west coast of the Kaipara District got awarded to the same contractors as the Mangawhai scheme, despite the known financial blowout problems with the Mangawhai scheme? I'm informed that another major contractor assessed the scheme at some $2 million less, but were warned off tendering for that project, or it would jeopardise them receiving roading contracts in the Kaipara District the following season. This is disgraceful. This is corruption. Where are these glaringly common known disclosures in the Auditor General's report released yesterday? They're not there. And yet today at the Finance Select Committee, the Auditor General was asked these exact questions and said that the Auditor General was aware of these rumours but had not made inquiries into them, did not feel they were relevant. They are relevant. There's an insidious, incestuous relationship here between Beckers, between the Kaipara District Council, between the CEO and between others involved there. Council executives and councillors who stood up to this Mr McKercher were knocked back very swiftly. Staff lived in fear of their positions if they questioned his decisions. Some chose to leave because the situation was intolerable, and McKercher in the end was taken out when they appointed commissioners and he was given a $240,000 gold handshake. Mr Chair, New Zealand First, as a result of extensive investigation, discussions and analysis, is of the view that this Parliament cannot confirm this legislation and cannot pass this legislation. The illegalities in entering into loans are not mere technicalities or formalities. They go to the heart of local government's obligation to consult ratepayers before entering into large financial commitments and whether rates can be set to cover illegal loans. In this case, the community consultation stopped at $34 million, but the scheme ended up being double that in price. Through all this, contractors have taken large margins. The ANZ Bank now, we are told, has taken the loans over from the former National Bank Lloyds and the Royal Bank of Scotland, ABN AMRO, at a 40% markdown on the loan value. The banks should have done due diligence on the whole scheme. Now the ANZ Bank should step up and write down these loans to a level to reduce the burden on the ratepayers of Kaipara. Likewise, I think Beckers should be stepping up to the mark, who've been there since 2000 advising on this whole scheme, allowed this to double in cost in the end. Beckers should come forward and also take a haircut on this as well. At the same time, the Audit Office should be taking a haircut as well. They allowed 5 years of clean audits to go through on the Kaipara District Council, and that is unbelievable. Again, the Auditor General needs to front up, and this government should front up. And as a result, I'm challenging Mike Saban, I'm challenging this government to step forward and ensure that all these parties come forward and pay their dues in terms of returning some of the funds that are rightfully due back to the ratepayers of Kaipara, so that they do not suffer, they don't carry on paying rates for the next decade after decade for mistakes and corruption that occurred within this Kaipara District Council. New Zealand First is here to stand up for these ratepayers. We know that this is going to be passed tonight, this legislation, but we think it's wrong. I've also got an SOP in here for later, but I do honestly believe, and New Zealand First honestly believes, this has got to be investigated. The Auditor General's report is insufficient. There needs to be proper police investigations into this matter. There needs to be investigations carried out at the highest level, and the people responsible for this should be held to account.
I call the Honourable Member Nikki Wagner.